So I promised you guys penguin videos, and the very first one is going to be talking about essentially why the Oswald Cobblepot of this universe is known as Oswald Cobb. And for that, we're going to be doing a few examples from both the real world, and we're also going to be taking an example from an animated series that has the character of the penguin. So the first thing we're going to do, and a lot of people don't like using Quora. I actually do, because a lot of the time the answers that you get on Quora are actually in depth, especially if you do your own research to back up what is essentially being told. So we got a response from Barb Cataldo, who has a bachelor's of arts in English literature and social science, and this particular post in 2020 has been viewed like 636,000 times. Let us take the Norman French who conquered England as an example. Their names came from their estates. Hypothetically, Raoul de Brezin, Ralph of Brezin, an estate in Normandy. He had a son named John who owned an estate called Lyons. So John's name was John de Lyons. This system made tracing family heritage difficult. So I believe it was William the Conqueror who came up with the usage of Fitz before the father's name to identify the Norman French in England. So we have John's son Pierre. Pierre becomes Pierre Fitzjohn. Pierre's son Raoul decides to spell his name in the English way, Ralph, and his name is Ralph Fitzpierre. But 200 years later, there are two or three cousins named Ralph Fitzpierre. So aristocrats tracked on their estate or city or area of birth to identify which one they were. Ralph Fitzpierre of Lancaster, Ralph Fitzpierre of Berkshire. Then trades began to arise. 1200 years, tradesmen and farmers went from being John to John Farmer to John Glazer to John Hunter. The last name helped to make their identity clearer. Then along came Henry VIII. He demanded a single patriarchal name system for all of the United Kingdom. No more John Pierre and his son being Peter Fitzjohn. So the family named the Fitzjohns or the Peters. The aristocrats would still tack on titles and estates to give a superior heir. John Peters, 3rd Lord of Blackmore and 7th Baron of Greenleaf. So in regards to the Cobblepots have always been an aristocratic family. They are, I wouldn't really call them nobility, but they're like one rung below nobility, just like the Waynes. The Waynes are also an aristocratic family as well. Say that word 3 times fast and don't get tongue-tied. So in regards to Cobblepot from the Batman series, not the older series, one of the more recent ones in probably like the last 15 years, Oswald Cobblepot is descended from an aristocratic family whose lineage goes back to Newcastle, England. Alfred Pennyworth's grandfather was once a butler to the English Cobblepots, and Alfred was raised on stories of how cruel and disrespectful the Cobblepots were to their staff. Side note, back in the old days, the butlers and maids who worked for aristocrats themselves were also aristocrats. They weren't of the same tier, as in the higher you go in the aristocratic tier, the closer you are to being related to the royal family. They were typically lower class aristocrats that were still well off, but their entire identity revolved around serving whoever their lord was. For this specific TV show, Alfred Pennyworth's, the Pennyworths, were an aristocratic family that served a higher aristocratic family in the form of the Cobblepots when the Cobblepots had money. Now, across all of the different Batman mediums, it's always the exact same theme for the Cobblepots, which is they start off being high tier with a lot of money, and then at some point in time they squander it. For this show, let me see something. I believe this show tells, here we go. Oswald's direct family line had a mansion located in Gotham City, but the family squandered their fortune away many years ago. As the apparent sole surviving member of the Cobblepot legacy, Oswald left the family estate fall into ruin and eventually converted it into a huge aviary. Now, talking about real world connotations, we're actually going to talk about the British royal family. When we look at the British royal family, especially the most recent royal family, you have where is he, King Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and Queen Elizabeth. However, if you were to follow Prince Philip's line all the way back over here, you have the House of Battenberg. Now, the House of Battenberg was its own kingdom with a king and queen. You had Alexander of Hesse and Princess Julia of Battenberg. Then the line continued to Louis, Prince of Battenberg, Alexander, Prince of Battenberg, Henry, Prince of Battenberg. There's a connection between Henry and Beatrice that leads down to Victoria, Eugene, who are the people that are the current day royal family of Spain. But the further you go down House Battenberg, you have Prince Andrew and you have Princess Alice of Battenberg. Now, during World War II, let's just say that they had some Nazi connections, some Yahtzee connections, and this led to their house basically collapsing. There was a plane crash that led to the deaths of a vast majority of House of Battenberg, or the Battenbergs, that led to essentially just Prince Philip being one of the last main members of the main family line. What ends up happening with the collapse of House Battenberg leads to the rise of House Mountbatten. Could no longer be the Battenbergs, had to basically, they dropped a tier, you could say, socially, and the new house name became Mountbatten. When he married Queen Elizabeth, I believe Queen Elizabeth is the House of Windsor. As a direct result, their children became, you know, Charles, was it Charles Mountbatten Windsor or something along those lines? Both of the names basically fused, and that has essentially been the case leading all the way up to William today. It's the exact same thing for the Gotham TV show, where we are essentially introduced to Oswald Cobb in the Penguin. At some point in time, in my opinion, they could have been the Cobblepots. They could have been old school aristocracy from either Gotham from back in the 1700s or from out in England a long time ago, and they've lost that money and that prestige and that life that they used to live. There's a chance that the show is basically going to be dealing with Oswald rebuilding that prestige, where what's his name, Falcone's son, when he talks about the fact that, you know, nobody's ever going to build a float for Oswald Cobb, nobody's going to cheer your dumb stupid face in the streets. There's a high probability that what we're essentially working towards is this guy who grew up on stories about their family being rich aristocrats back in England or back in the old days of Gotham, then now they've fallen on hard times, who, when he gains the power and the control that he's essentially looking for, is going to end up being the Oswald Cobblepot that we're essentially familiar with from other Batman mediums, and he's going to then take the moniker of the Penguin for himself. It's a journey. It's a journey that we are essentially going to be on, and it's a journey that I really can't wait to see how exactly it plays out for our old boy. But that's it. That's the video. Peace.